My friends, today it is time to talk about acting white. Because it's 2021, whiteness is not simply having a skin color, it is a way of behavior. At least that's what the woke lefties tell me. And also the white supremacists. If you've been paying attention, you'll notice that a lot of different races are now part of the white race, or alternatively, part of the black race. For example, Jason Wardle, a teacher with Mediterranean and Jewish heritage, is left bewildered as his trade union insists he is black, despite telling him that he's not. Behold, a black man. Mr. Wardle, who is a design technology teacher, was invited by the National Education Union to a meeting of black teachers. The NEU says it treats black as a political term rather than a signifier of African heritage. Therefore, the term includes all members who self-identify as black, Asian, and any other minority ethnic group who don't identify themselves as white. When Mr. Wardle contacted the union to say that he wasn't black, the NEU informed him that since he did not consider himself white, he had to be registered as such. Jewish was an option in the religion section only, which leads me to believe that the NEU doesn't recognize Jewish as a race. I don't feel like an actual black member would necessarily want me down as a black member, and rightly so. Of course, it's definitely not just Jewish people who get forced into the false dichotomy of white or black, and that's it. But it's also Arabs, Persians, and other people from the Middle East. Remember, JonTron is a white supremacist, apparently. But check out this article here. Prescriptive Racialism and Racial Exclusion, written by a man named Muhammad Ali. No, not the great one, this is somebody else. The crowd outside the auditorium was growing larger and louder. Controversy had arisen over the panel on religious extremism in the Middle East that I had organized at my university. A petition to cancel the event in the wake of the horrific New Zealand massacre had been circulated among the student body during the previous week, forcing my co-organizers and me to defend ourselves against accusations of Islamophobia. Months of work had gone into the event, and I even managed to secure funding for the speakers, on the condition that the event went ahead. At that moment, it looked like I was going to fail. The Students for Democratic Society were protesting it, and they spooked the president of the college Republicans, who are now considering canceling it. Finally, one of our panelists, an imam, managed to persuade the college Republican president to go ahead. Despite the constant heckling during the speaker's remarks and the Q&A session that followed, the event did finally proceed as planned. The panel and I addressed the New Zealand atrocity and explicitly condemned white nationalism, but the protesters remained unmoved and even interrupted the moment of silence for the massacre's victims. Throughout the event, they held a banner that read, "You do not represent us." After the event, I overheard a protester berate one of the panelists and complained that the event had not been organized by an Arab. I interjected to inform her that I was the organizer of the event and that I am indeed an Arab. "You don't count," she immediately retorted. "We know your politics." I subsequently discovered this woman was the president of the Arab Student Association. I was already aware of this practice of Uncle Tomming members of minorities who challenged certain orthodoxies, but this was the first time I had experienced it firsthand. Such attitudes were evident in many of the protesters' objections to the event. Faisal Saeed al-Mutar, an Iraqi-born secular rights advocate and the only Arab on the panel, bore the brunt of these attacks. He was denounced as a puppet and a traitor for discussing the role of religion in motivating groups like ISIS in his native country. And this does seem to be an accurate description of how the intersectionalists, how they operate when it comes to race. To use this Ayanna Pressley quote for I think like the 6th time on this channel,
"For whatever lived experience and identity that you represent, if you are not prepared to come to that table and to represent that voice, don't come. Because we don't need any more brown faces that don't want to be a brown voice. We don't need black faces that don't want to be a black voice. We don't need Muslims that don't want to be a Muslim voice. We don't need queers that don't want to be a queer voice."
You're not black unless you think black. You're not Arab unless you think Arab. There is a large section of socialists, especially online right now, who have moved past the idea that race is simply some kind of genetic marker, but is actually a way of thinking, feeling, and viewing the world. It is no longer an immutable trait, but rather it's an ideology that you adopt. This is how, after all, straight black men are the white people of black people. This is a ridiculous statement in a ridiculous headline of a ridiculous article on a ridiculous website, but this is where critical theory leads you. If the dominant culture really is whiteness, if it's the white, cis-normative, heteropatriarchal, capitalist, whatever, then every step that you're closer to that, you're more white. And using this lens, completely stupid concepts like having a colonized mind, or internalized misogyny, or whatever the fuck, they all completely make sense. The way in which these people view the world is fundamentally flawed, but within that framework, of course all this regressive nonsense would show up. In fact, using this logic, if you were to show somebody like Ayanna Pressley these black women, she might actually call them white men. Of course, the political advantage of this point of view is that you can basically define anybody however you like, for whatever reason serves your purposes that day. For example, a school district decides Asians aren't students of color. Administrators at North Thurston Public Schools, which oversees some 16,000 students, have lumped Asians in with whites and measured their academic achievements against students of color, a category that includes Black, Latinx, Native American, Pacific Islander, and multiracial students. Where's the Arabs, North Thurston? Where's the Jews, you fucking racists? Where's the Indians? Oh wait, the Indians are actually pretty successful. Maybe they count as white too. The meme that Asians are whites is something that's reasonably widespread. I think I actually did a joking video about it a few years ago, about the alt-right's Asian fetish. It's not just the alt-right though. I know Louis Laval has been saying the future of the white race is to mix them with Asians. I think he just says like he wants an Asian girlfriend, to be honest. But still, this is some weird South African apartheid-style shit, isn't it? We're actually at the point where woke people are giving us honorary whites. What does that make Tim Pool? Tim Pool's half white, half Asian. Is he a super white? Don't be obtuse. Asians definitely have privilege over every other minority due to their close proximity to whiteness. It's like I said, it's intersectional bullshit. The closer you are to whiteness, the more that the commies think they can just discriminate against you. But what is this whiteness? What is this colonizing ideology? Let's see if we can figure it out. White people food is creating an unobtainable picture of health. Alright, so I got it. If you eat healthy, you're white. Okay. I thought depression was a white people disease. A conversation with depressed while black. If you have mental health problems, you're white. Okay, got it. Philly rapper Pop Huna is getting blackballed by the industry for paperwork of him cooperating with police when he was 13. His friend was killed in front of him and his mom. It's becoming a debate because of his age at the time. Well, it's also becoming a debate because cooperating with the police when your friend gets killed in front of you is apparently bad? Like, fucking what? This no-snitch culture is, in my opinion, ridiculous. Are we actually at the point where we're saying that, not being a fucking gangsta is being white? Is that whiteness now? Is getting out of the hood and being successful whiteness? Pretending you don't have feelings is a colonized white-ass reaction. My ancestors honored their emotions, and so the fuck will I. So, having discipline, or reacting appropriately to a situation, or being at least somewhat of a rational person, that's whiteness. Intelligence is a white man's mythology, a phantasmal concept, a non-referring term, syncatagrammatic. Alright, got it. If you're smart, you're white. I understand, you fucking white supremacist. But of course we would get here eventually. How else would you characterize the Proud Boys as a white supremacist group when, regardless of their politics, their racial makeup is actually quite diverse? Well, the Washington Post tells us, to understand Trump's support, we must think in terms of multiracial whiteness. To these people, a black person who doesn't think black, which means, be a lefty, vote Democrat, whatever, has colonized thinking. He has whiteness on his side, multiracial whiteness, in fact. Is anybody surprised that the article is written by Christina Beltran, who is a very white woman? The article itself is opinion piece garbage, which you expect from the Washington Post nowadays. But Christina Beltran gave a very interesting interview that I think we should probably listen to.
I want to read what you wrote in part. For voters who see the very act of acknowledging one's racial identity as itself racist, the politics of multiracial whiteness reinforces their desired approach to colorblind individualism. Can you explain what you mean?
Sure. I think that one of the things that's interesting about the politics of multicultural conservatism, for example, is that multicultural conservatism, which is the kind of conservative politics of reaching out to other racial minorities practiced by folks like Jack Kemp or George W. Bush, was an effort to recognize the specific histories and backgrounds of particular racial populations and to say that they could be part of the GOP. And I think that one of the things that's interesting is that there's a segment of people of color who don't necessarily want to be recognized at all. They don't want to be recognized for their racial distinctiveness, right? That for them, the very act of sort of identifying them as Latino, as African American, that they themselves have a certain discomfort with that very logic. They want to be understood as simply Americans outside of those kinds of identity categories. I think that one of the big political divides we face right now is people who find the very act of talking about those histories of racial exclusion as divisive, because the act of talking about it and acknowledging it produces a kind of defensiveness or anger at even discussing it, the idea that unity should be practiced from sort of not engaging with our history, not sort of celebrating the best stuff and not really acknowledging that we have a complicated, beautiful, tragic, inspiring inheritance that we have to understand to go forward.
So let me get this straight. According to this person, the problem is non-white people who don't like identity politics and how they react when identity politics are forced on them. We have to understand this to go forward. So if you're a non-white person who's not idpol obsessed, to Beltran, you're a backwards regressive element. You might even say a reactionary. This is some ridiculous bullshit, guys. And is anybody surprised that, say, right-leaning people are beginning to latch on to this multiracial whiteness? I mean, look at this. This guy could basically be a young Ian Miles Cheong. And of course white people are never racially discriminated against. Of course. Especially if you're one of those multiracial whites, then nothing that happens to you is actually discrimination, because you've internalized all of that colonization, or whatever the fuck they'd say. Look at this picture, dude. The votes of black Americans should count twice. Vote reparations would empower us to replace oppressive institutions with life-affirming structures of equality. By Brandon Hasbrook. Look at this pale-ass Sean King motherfucker. What are you, like 1/8 black? I swear to God, my skin is darker than yours because I'm half Italian. Orlando Hall was executed last night. Hall was a black man convicted by an all-white jury. He is the 8th person executed this year by the Trump administration. Orlando Hall kidnapped, raped, and buried a 16-year-old girl alive. Fuck your race card. He is not more innocent simply because of his skin color. But if you're an intersectionalist, you have to go to bat for these people. Because that is where intersectionality takes you. Dear white and Asian people, stop going to black churches to get vaccinated. These sites are prioritizing black people. After they got dogpiled, we don't have time to educate all communities on equity and the importance of the black church. To our Asian followers, we don't have time to educate your community on disenfranchisement and anti-black racism. We are working to promote equity on very level. A lot of racist messages have come our way from the Asian community about our post. As a community, we are dying from COVID-19 in double digits with our counterparts in the Latino/X communities. We stand by what we said. Blah, blah, blah. And of course, violence against Asians is not a hate crime because they're white, right? Of course the roof Koreans were all just oppressors in the end. Of course when black people attack Asian people randomly on the street, they're simply punching up. Violence against Asian Americans and why the term hate crime should be used carefully. Social media posts have conflated violence against people who are Asian American with hate crimes against the community at large. That is what happens whenever there is violence against somebody who is black. It's always made into a race thing. It's always tied into the community at large. But let's be fucking real here. Jacob Blake was shot by police while trying to abduct children. Rayshard Brooks, regardless of him being a scumbag in other areas of his life, was a danger on multiple levels, from driving drunk to fighting with the cops. And although George Floyd's situation was exacerbated by admittedly terrible actions from the police officers, he still ultimately overdosed. Every single time a black person dies, it becomes a community thing. It becomes a racial thing, whether it's warranted or not. And now people have the gall to say, don't make it an Asian thing when Asian people are targeted and attacked. They say, don't use the hashtag Asian Lives Matter, because no lives matter until black lives do, at least according to the Twitterati. Sometimes Asian people are actually the victim of a race-based crime, especially if it's a white person who commits it. So there was a shooting, I think about a week ago, where a white person shot and killed 8 people, 6 of whom were Asian American, and because the shooting happened at a spa, they may or may not have been sex workers. And despite the left throwing the Asians under the bus this whole time, suddenly now it was all about race. It was all about people of color. It was all about whiteness and white violence. And then as soon as it came out that the shooting appeared not to be racially motivated, people were up in arms. But here's the actual truth. Anybody can experience discrimination. This was not even considered a controversial opinion, at least when I was young. The 90s and the 2000s were full of PSAs that said racism against anybody was bad, including white people. Yes, Shakaran, they said the Irish experienced racism because they did. Because everyone has. Every group of people on the face of this planet has been both the oppressed and the oppressor class. And it ultimately doesn't matter. Really, it doesn't. What matters is what people are doing today. What crimes are they committing today? What racial othering are they committing today? What denying of culture or identity are they committing today? And today, all of that absolutely terrible shit seems to be coming from the left. Thank you for watching, my friends. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to share it around and do all of the other algorithm positive stuff that the YouTube engagement metrics like. I don't know. Sub for more, or hit up my Patreon or Subscribestar if you want to keep it coming. And be sure to stick around, because I'm putting up a new video every single day. So I'll see you tomorrow. I love you.